Hello Steamians and homesteaders alike. This is a video about changing brakes and rotors on a 2003 Mazda Tribute. First, gather your tools. You're going to need a 19mm impact socket, a 7mm Allen hex, an 18mm half-inch drive, a screwdriver, a C-clamp, a hammer, and an impact driver. Alright, so if you are a homesteader, you're also probably a car owner. Because the reality is when we live out in the country, even if the road that we live on is sort of busy, like ours is, we've got a lot of traffic that goes through here because there's honestly in northwest Pennsylvania, it's sort of just like the main artery for getting back and forth between all the small places. So this is my daughter's Mazda Tribute. I took a vacation day today. And yesterday we just spent some time with the family. She was out running around with friends, and then she sent me a message back that the car was making noise. So it sounds like there's probably some brake pads that are bad, so I'm going to walk you through sort of that process on the brake pads. So we're going to put some we're going to jack this thing up, and we're going to put some brake pads on it. So first thing that we want to do is we want to find a good spot to jack on. So there's a motor mount here. Don't want to hit any oil pans or anything like that. But if you'll notice right here is a good solid motor mount, and it's part of the frame. So we'll jack on that. We'll get some jack stands underneath it, and then we'll take some tires off. We'll go from there. You want to make sure that wherever you put the jack, that it can roll forward as it jacks up, because you don't want it slipping off of the jacks or off the jack while you're jacking it up. You can do some major damage. In fact, I remember my dad owned a junkyard when I was a teenager and before a teenager, and I spent a lot of time working the family business. And so here's a cross member here. We've got a portion of frame that we're on. But I spent a lot of time working family business. I also had more cars than probably most people have in their whole life in a short time of maybe 3 or 4 years of driving. Wide assortment of different vehicles. So one morning, and of course they weren't the best vehicles, but they were sufficient. But one morning I went out to get ready for school, and a flat tire. So, you know, you go out, you have a flat tire. Some people that ruins their day. Me, I put the jack underneath. It was a huge 78 Mercury Grand Marquis. And I get down just like I am now. I look for a spot, I start jacking. It falls just a little bit. I'm just jacking up the one side, and it falls a little bit. I look under and I don't really see much of anything, so I keep jacking. I change the tire. I drive to school, and on the way to school I blow up the engine, because what had happened is when it fell, it hit the side of the oil pan. The oil, which you know was above the level of where the oil was, it didn't leak when it was jacked up. Once I put it down and started driving, it all leaked out, and by the time I got to school I had blown that engine up. So be careful where you're jacking. Then we're going to let this down a little bit and put the weight on the jack stands. Alright, now we'll work on changing the taking off the tires and changing the brake pads. So, all right, let me get you a little closer here so you can see what's going on. So Obviously, we can see we have some wear here. You got a little bit of grooving. This is what happens when you don't get these changed before. So we're going to try to see what the problem is. It looks like there's plenty of pad in there, so it might be the back pads, which if we look at, feel some slight grooving there, but we'll see what they look like. So one of the things that you have to do is these have a plastic cover covering the Allen head bolts that you're going to take off here. So you want to keep those covered. We'll set those aside. Then we're going to make sure to pop off this retainer wire here. So we'll get a screwdriver to do that most likely, but you want to pop these out. So when in doubt, always carry your handy multi-tool with you. Okay, so you can see how that was originally in there. So it goes in there, then it'll clamp on. We'll show that in a little bit. Now, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to open up the hood, and we'll go ahead and open up the brake reservoir, because we're going to push some of that as we open up that cylinder. We compress that cylinder, close the cylinder. Actually, it's open right now. We're going to compress some of that brake fluid back up into the reservoir. So, all right, we'll open the hood here real quickly. So brake reservoir is over here. We're going to open this. This is our brake fluid. You'll notice that it's low, which sometimes is indicative of those fully extended calipers. So we'll see how full it is once we pop these back out and they're in a little bit better shape. Okay, so it's getting a little cloudier out, and the reason is, if you're watching the video, is I left for probably about an hour, and me and my daughter just went over and picked up some hex head sockets. And so basically I believe that this takes a 7mm, so I bought some SAE standard and 7mm. So if you remember, we cleared out that hole where those go. Yep, that's what we needed, 7mm. So we'll grab the socket. Okay. So these are the slides, they're shoulder bolts. I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. I'm just going to loosen that one up. And we'll loosen that one up. So these basically hold the caliper on. And so as they hold the caliper also has to be able to slide back and forth. So there's a piston in here that as you hit the brakes hydraulically, those squeeze and this piston pushes out. This side doesn't have a piston, so this side is just being pulled over by that piston. So here's what that shoulder bolt looks like. And so it only goes up to here, and the rest of this is for it to slide on. So it slides in and out as it compresses. Work this off out of here. See that has the clip in it that holds the rear brake. So we're just going to set this up here for the time being. Then we have our front brake. Alright, we'll just set this up here. Now we're going to look at the pads. So this is worn a little bit different than I'm used to seeing. Usually this front pad, and you can tell the front from the back has the clips in it, clips it in the back, the front just rides in there. But the back pad is actually in really bad shape. See, there's hardly any pad on that, and that's where we're getting some of our grinding sounds. In fact, you can see some of that. So typically, you want your rotors here, that's this part that the brake actually works on, to be fairly smooth and not have a lot of grooves in them. Now I bought new rotors. You want a minimum thickness on these, and you can take them down and get them turned. You don't have to buy new ones, but I did buy new rotors to put on this. And these can be turned if they're well above about 24 millimeters, about an inch thick. You really want more than that because they're going to turn it down. There's some grooves on this, and we can see where some of our noise is coming from. So we're going to take off the caliper mount here, and then the rotor will just slide off. We can see how it's loose. It wants to come out now, but we'll just have to pull those off. Okay, so we switch over to our 1/2 inch drive. A little bigger. And the added leverage that we need to pull these off. And these are pretty big bolts. Okay, so you can see how that was mounted back there. Now we'll make sure that's up there. And we'll look at our rotor. So you got a line of rust around this outside. these are probably pretty close without measuring them to being able to be turned, but you can see the heat and the scorching that was taking place back here. And so we're just going to put on some new ones. Alright, we're going to go ahead and install the caliper mount, so that'll go through there. And we'll get it started. Alright, now one of the things that we'll want to do is we can see how far the cylinder is extended out. Now we're going to see how free that is just by giving it a push with this screwdriver. So it doesn't readily push back in. That probably means that it was overextended and it sat that way for a while. We do have a way around that. And that way around that is a C-clamp. So we're going to fit the C-clamp down inside there. Begin to tighten that C-clamp. It broke it loose enough that you can see it's starting to move in now. And as we're doing this, by the way, we can see on the reservoir, looking across there, that it's beginning to fill up with all of that. So we can see that that should be seated fully in there now. Now we're going to take our brake pads that we have. And brake pads will work if we look at them. They try to make them so that they can universally be used on either side. So I just want to give you an idea of the two brake pads. Alright, so you'll notice the pad has some wings on it. This is the front pad. We've already clipped in the back pad. So the back pad has a clip, much like this. Goes inside the cylinder of the caliper. So the front pad's going to go on here first. And you can see how this works. It will ride as it begins to wear down these rails. So now always comes the tricky part. You want to make sure that you have these pushed out enough so that you can get them in there and get them lined up, those shoulder bolts. So get it in there, make sure we have it seated, push these through and see if we can get them started. So righty-tighty. Alright, so we have those installed. Now we want to make sure we put our caps on because we want to be able to get this off again in the future if we have to ever change these. So we got those in place. And we've got some brakes. New pads, new calipers. We'll go ahead and install our tire now. And if we were, I'd just make this note. So if you're in a different situation than I am, and you didn't have the money to install new rotors, those rotors would have been fine. You could have used those. It won't have a perfect wear on your brakes, on your brake pads. They'll probably wear out faster. But for the price of $26, $27 for brake pads, you could have done this job most likely. Now I haven't looked at the other side. I'm just going off of this side here. And hey, on my old truck, I've got a 1992 F-150. On that truck, I just did the brakes recently, and it's got a rotor that probably needs turned, but I don't drive the truck very often, and I wasn't going to buy a new rotor. And honestly, it was sort of cold and snowy the night that I was changing it, because I had somebody, and the reason I was changing it is I was loaning it out to somebody. Somebody's car broke down. And it's just an old truck that we have here at the house. I've had it for a number of years, really serviced us well. But as I was driving it that weekend at church, somebody said that their car was dead, and so I said I had something they could use until their car got back up and running, but I didn't want to put them in it the way it was. So we threw on, me and my son threw on a set of pads on it. The rotors weren't in the best shape, but they worked, and they were able to use it like they needed to in order to get back and forth and things like that for a week. So when we go to install this, I want you to see something. We're going to do a star pattern. You never just go around when you tighten lugs. You always go from this lug to one across from it, from that one to one across from it, from that one to one across from it, from that one to one across from it. And after you get them all, and that's to help put it on evenly, after you get them all in, then you can go right around and do a clockwise or counterclockwise, if that, if you're from Australia or something, I guess. A clockwise motion to tighten them, torque them down. So I'm going to use this to run them on, and then I'll tighten them by hand, and I'll tighten them all when I put them down on the ground. Alright, so that's the first one. I'm going to do the other side. If there's anything exciting over there, I'll let you know, but if not, I think you got the idea of how to do it. After this, we'll check and see if we need to add any brake fluid after we get these replaced. May have to, we shouldn't have to do very much of this because we didn't open any of the brake lines, but we may have to pump the brakes a little bit and just to make sure that the calipers are extended out. So the first time you go to drive it, it's going to feel like you don't have brakes, so make sure you pump it up before, and that's to get that caliper, which we fully put in, to get it pushed out against the brakes just ever so slightly. And then when you let off, you'll go down the road, you'll wear it a little bit, you'll smell a little bit of new brake pads. That's sort of standard, but other than that, it's really not a difficult job. You do want to make sure, if you're doing a 2003 Mazda Tribute or Ford Escape, they have a 7mm Allen head socket. I had to go buy one. I have individual Allen head wrenches, but this took a socket sort of to use and break out of there. All right, I will catch you later. I really do appreciate you guys. Hopefully you found this worthwhile. Give me some upvotes, some follows. Give me some steam. All right, God bless. Talk to you guys later.